I like to think I'm the Black Templar guy. I have well over 13,000 points of painted Black Templar, and I don't like to think about how many points of unpainted Templar I have. Recently, I got them all out to do a count of how many points I have, and basically I have to do it by weight at this point, there's so many models, but looking upon a sea of 2-inch tall dudes, there was a little something lacking. I don't know why, but I've never thought to make terrain specific for my Black Templars to help tell their story, because my lore for the Templars is epic. My crusade has been warring against Nyx's blue orcs, the dorks, for hundreds of years now, and I want something big and impressive and looks really good with my Templar model standing in front of it to help sell that story. So I made this. Well, it was a team effort from everyone here at EonsOfBattle. Sculptor extraordinaire Radium Minis, artist Liqerise, Commander-in-Chief Nick, and me. We made a spaceship based on no particular intellectual property. This is an escort class void ship, one of the smallest vessels of my Black Templar's crusade fleets, and it'll be the centerpiece of my collection. From its heroic eagle prow to its spilling guts, this thing will give a Templar flair to the battlefield and look great on the shelf next to my army. After a quick rattlecan prime, I'm gonna eat my dessert first with the head. I used some painter's tape to mask off the eagle and then painted the cowcatcher with the same tan paints I used for my Black Templar shoulder pads. I want to try to use all the same colors so he matches. And with the tan, I want to get some Templar's red onto the ship as well. More tape to mask off the painting I just did, and on the bottom business end, it's a little too uneven for tape, so Silly Putty to the rescue. This stuff works really well for airbrush masking. It's just got the right amount of tackiness while not leaving behind any residue on the model. I sprayed a dark red onto my ship, which in addition to being Templar-y, is also reminiscent of real-world sailing ships, which 40k ships are a combination of. Well, that and trains. And churches. And basically everything except rocket ships. Now to get the tape off. I want some Templar symbols, but a little on the subtle side. If I was painting Battlefleet Gothic scale ships, they would probably just be dots. I used a Templar stencil and airbrushed a bright red to get my symbols, lining them up over the entire side of the ship. Then it was onto the gold. Army Painter Gold's my favorite gold, and 2 coats gave me a lovely rich looking eagle and spooky statue exhaust ports. Then it was onto the shading. A watered down earth color gave the tan paint some contrast, and some red paint along the top edge of the stripes make it look a little bit more interesting. The gold's looking good, but a little flat. I dry brushed some silver over the gold so that the edges were highlighted. Now my spaceship head is looking pristine. It's time to ruin it, as it's currently not doing too well in multiple pieces on the planet's surface. I sponged a light gray mix next to the holes in the armor and went over these spots again with black. Then I broke out the washes, a black wash over the gold and a brown wash over the body. This brings out all the little dings and scratches that emergency re-entry to the planet has given to the hull. I sponged on some of my original tan color to show paint chipping and make the surface of the armor look more rough and uneven. And I picked out the skeleton of the spaceship with black paint, dry brushing some dark and light gray to make it stand out from the light warm colors of the surface. Now for that big ol' ram. I loaded up my dry brush with silver paint and rubbed the front end until it looked like all the paint had worn off. The head of this escort class vessel that has been ferrying my Black Templar to and from the battlefield is now complete. And if you want to get your hands on this head and the rest of the spaceship, it is available on our Patreon. This ship is our January terrain pack, an epic full-size vessel perfect for adding a thematic story to your games of 40k, 30k, heck, even Star Wars or Age of Sigmar if you're willing to have some fun with it. These massive chunks of debris make the perfect terrain for hiding behind or fighting over. Our Patreon is the place to be if you want to support us doing what we do and bringing you cool stuff like this. With the head complete, it is time to work on the rest of this spaceship, and it is a massive spaceship. It kind of reminds me of in Star Wars when Anakin managed to land that starship without the business end of the starship, the engines. I was never quite sure how he pulled that off, but I guess my Black Templar did it too, just in a lot more pieces. This ship has a ton of lovely details. These gun ports have the shape reminiscent of Space Marine helmets, and on the flip side, each gun has the controls and targeting computers still attached, although the crew was likely vaporized upon landing. I threw some black paint into my airbrush to do some shading and spraying it into corners and any spot where the sun don't shine. Now to give this ship the look it deserves, I need to do some dry brushing, but even my big old dry brush would take forever to do the job. So I went through my collection and found this. This brush was actually just in my house when I bought it. But you know what they say, one man's trash is another man's dry brush. I worked some gray paint into the bristles and slapped, rubbed, and stippled paint everywhere, giving some highlights to all the little details and shapes of the hull. I'm basically slap chopping this ship. I have my undercoat done, so now it's time to make some colors. I mixed up a dark blue and a dark brown with a lot of water. And I put the dark brown over the exhaust ports and the blue over the Templar faces and armor. For my Templar models, I mix a little Leviathan blue into contrast Black Templar so they have a cold tinge, so this blue is replicating that color. Now that I have a little color, I use black paint to pin shade the different mechanical doodads on the Mini. Then I sprayed some metallic paint over the guns. This ship had at least a dozen cannons on each side. Although it is a small vessel, a couple dozen of these could do some serious damage, probably able to strip an orc junk down to its bones in one broadside. Now to start highlighting. I took my gray paint and added some sky blue to brighten it up and to make it cold. Then I took my miniature dry brush and brushed all of the edges to make them pop and did some stippling in the middle of each armor piece. That transition from black to very light gray makes these parts look interesting without looking like they're just light gray. I love how the armor looks, but I think it could use some more razzle dazzle. I took my Templar stencil and gave each face a crusade symbol, just like the ones I paint across my crusaders in my army. I've had mixed results with dry brushing in the past, but I feel like it's really working out on this big old Templar vehicle. I also think primer has a big thing to do with it. I used rattle can primer on this, which I usually use airbrush primer on my minis, but the rattle can primer is a little bit thicker and grittier, and I think the dry brushing likes that grittiness more. Also, usually when I prime my minis, I prime them and then 5 seconds later, I put on my paint. So maybe that's why some of the primer gets rubbed off every now and again. But I'm thinking that this is how I'm gonna go for my Black Templar vehicles, which is good because I've been rapidly increasing my Black Templar motor pool. I have 2 little impulsors, a gladiator, and a big honkin' repulsor. And they're not painted yet, because I don't know how, but after working on this piece, I think I know how to do it. Speaking of this piece though, I think it has one flaw, and I think it's time to fix that. The parts of the spaceship that feel done are the painted armor, the cream and red of the cowcatcher front end, and the cold gray of the Space Marine faces. The bones of the ship showing through, the skeleton feels incomplete. They're not different enough. I think the way to fix that is by making them metal. The guns are metal, and even though they're pretty much the same color gray as the armor, it feels different because one is shiny and one is flat. Now, it would have been nice to do this first, but sometimes painting is a journey, and part of that journey is protecting your previous steps from the next steps. Time to break out the masking tape again. You know what? Let's have a little fun dog fact. Let's see what we got. Fun fact, the shape of a dog's face suggests its longevity. A long face means a longer life. Is that true? I feel like dogs with really long faces usually are really big, and big dogs don't live as long. I sprayed gunmetal over the bones of this beached whale, and already it's starting to feel like there's some separation between the armor and the metal. I mixed up a black wash with some Army Painter speed paint and speed paint medium. I wasn't having much luck with the bottle until I found and extracted this big old booger that was stuck in the tip. I washed the metal bits with this black wash mixture, running it into all the textures and damage, and once that was dry, some dry brushing of silver. Now it's feeling much better to me. It looks like one of my Space Marines, with each part painted its own color and separate from the others. Just one big Titan-sized Space Marine. I got paint on my arm. It's not coming off. One thing I'm really looking forward to with this terrain, other than just having a super cool spaceship that's in the color of my Black Templar, is placing them in the center of the board to cut the board in half. 40K is a game that you need really good terrain, because terrain can make or break the game. And most armies have access to anything killers. Strength like 10 to 14, usually like D6 plus 2 or 3, blast weapons that'll just decimate anything they shoot at. And if they get to shoot at something turn 1, the game ends very quickly afterwards. But if the board is cut in half by giant line of sight blocking terrain, all of a sudden movement and deployment becomes very, very important. It's almost as if you have to play the game. The head of the ship has some decorative paint on it, and I want to bring this artistic flourish into the engines as well. These are the in-atmosphere engines. The rocket engines are nowhere to be seen, probably lost in translation. From space to atmosphere. I need to get paint on the wing without getting any on the engines. And you know what that means? I need another fun dog fact. Did you know 3 dogs survived the sinking of the Titanic? Well, that's just kind of sad, because a lot of people didn't survive the sinking of the Titanic. And I'm working on a ship that's broken in half. This is getting weird. I used this not so fun dog fact to keep the paint off the engines, and then masking tape to get a nice dark red racing stripe down the length of the wing. A little highlighting with a light red, and then it was time to make the paint look weathered. I took an earth color and watered it down, splashing it all over the tan paint. Although it looks like a wash while it's wet, it's gonna dry like normal paint and just tint the color rather than leaving harsh lines in the recesses. Speaking of those recesses, I then slobbered the whole wing in Army Painter soft tone. This did shade the recesses and turned that tan into a lovely warm color. For a final touch, some sponging of my original tan color. And not only is this the perfect color for my Templar shoulder pads, it also looks exactly like the buildings from Tatooine. I might have to repaint my Shatterpoint terrain with this recipe. All right, I have all of my pieces. It is now time to assemble this sucker, and it is going to be glorious. I kind of wish it wasn't destroyed. I mean, it would be unbelievably enormous if it wasn't, but it'd be kind of cool to hang like a 5-foot spaceship off of the ceiling. I put a wire brush into my Dremel to knock off the paint in the spots I need to glue, and then I mixed up some quickset epoxy. For big honkin' 3D printed parts, I haven't found anything better. And speaking of big honkin' 3D printed parts, this starship was printed for us by Only Games. You can check them out, linked in the description, and they printed us a spare, and we're picking one follower of our newsletter to send it to. You can sign up to our newsletter linked below. Ah, this thing is so awesome. I can hear the orchestral music playing in my head. This thing drops out of warp space, the Giller fields go down, and then an orc rocket takes it out of orbit and it crashes to the planets. But now it is time to introduce this sucker to my crusade. The Cobra class escort has definitely seen better days, but I love the look of my army around it. Oh, my Black Templar army just brings me so much joy. And just the idea, I almost imagine my army battling against Nyx Blue Orcs is like the reverse of Hell's Reach. Instead of Space Marines defending a hive city from just endless waves of orcs, it's my Black Templar besieging an orc city. And unlike Hell's Reach, well, I guess just like Hell's Reach, the Black Templar are gonna win. This vehicle might be a little worse for wear, but really, the escort class frigates aren't the ones that are hauling Space Marines around. They're the ones protecting the larger capital ships that actually house all of the Space Marines. And my Space Marines, they don't even need them. We've got drop pods, we got teleport homers, we got lots of ways of getting down onto a battlefield. The Crash spaceship is available on our Patreon. If you want to get it printed physically, you can check it out on Only Games. Thanks for watching.